Chapter 1, Zhou, edited by Zhou, the book Contemporary Asian America, a multidisciplinary reader, third edition, Zhou and Anthony Ocampo. This chapter is titled On Strike, the San Francisco Steak Strike. Now, this is an epic strike. And actually, it was people of color, students of color, and the community asking and not demanding to have classes that actually represent them. Now, you may not think that this was epic, but actually it is. In fact, the class you're taking is a result of this strike. This is an Asian American Studies class, and we're going over chapter 1. And this class is banned in Arizona. It's also banned in 13 states right now. So what you're learning is actually secretive. And actually, a lot of people don't want you to know this knowledge because it empowers you, it makes you stronger, and it makes you happier and prouder of your community. Now, we got to know our facts and our history. How did we even get here? Well, in 1872, there was the Page Act, which blocked all Asian women from immigrating, specifically Chinese women. They said they're immoral. Now, remember that. Don't forget that. Okay. Now, 1882 was the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was the first and rarely only, I think there were other ones, but one of the first and only specifically ethnic acts that banned a specific group. It was so bad that even in 1907, they started banning all the other Asian groups. So 1907 actually banned all Japanese, and later it was all the Asians. It was like called the anti-Asiatic laws of 1920. So pretty much all the Asians were banned. And that's important to note, this history. You wanted the Asians to come to kind of farm your land, but you don't want them to live here. Now, I want to go back and circle back to 1865, the Page Act. Now, this law prohibited the recruitment in the United States of unfree laborers and women for, quote, immoral purposes, but was enforced primarily against the Chinese. Now, this was huge. Now, think about it. If the first time you block Asians or Chinese, but you specifically block women, right? Because you're quote unquote saying immoral. How does that translate now? Well, there's a sexualization, eroticization of Asian women, and also the demonization of Asian women. And look what happened during COVID-19 and continuing even now. Asian women have been murdered in 2020, 2023. Multiple Asian women were murdered. Michelle Go was pushed in front of the train. Actual child was slashed. Several Asian women were murdered. And again, does that have something to do with the Page Act? It 100% does. Unfortunately, it 100% does. Look at the picture. Hate is a virus. Hashtag stop Asian hate. Now that's a recent, very recent picture from COVID-19. But I would say, looking at that, do you remember 1865 Page Act? Guess what? Wasn't that the same thing? Saying they're immoral, they're carriers of disease? That's right. The past is not the past. Now, unfortunately, a child in Texas, the face was slashed because they were accused of being COVID carriers. They literally thought if you eat Chinese food or all Asian foods, that you would get COVID. And terribly, a Thai American in San Francisco was pushed and down and killed. Also, recently in 2021, 6 Asian women were murdered at their work site. And I would argue that they would be alive today if they weren't Asian women. Now, I want you to think back. Is 1865 Page Act important? Yes, it's very important because that kind of like situates how Asians are viewed and formed and ongoingly murdered. Now, here, something that I want you to write down, circle this. So if you're having notes, I want you to write this down, write this down, write this down. This is the most important thing. Students always ask me, Professor Bond, what is the most important thing you want me to learn from this class? And I always say, well, good question. The most important thing I want you to learn is actually the 1965 Hart-Celler Act, or they call it the Immigration Act. That is the most important thing I want you to learn. So the next question is, But why? Why do I have to learn it? Well, here, if you're a person of color, if you're Latino, if you're Asian, or if you're any person that is non-Anglo, guess what? Pretty much all the groups, except for Native Americans, were blocked from coming to the United States. And it was African American activism that pushed for rights, social rights, for equal immigration of every single group. And guess what? Because of that, it was primarily Latinos and Asians who really took advantage of it, and of course, some African immigrants. And they're the reason you came in is because of African American activism. Now, of course, at the time, they did not know that this would change the quote color of the United States. And actually, there's lots of people who want to change this act right now. They want to get it off the book. So maybe it'll be successful. We'll see. But again, the Hart-Celler Act, pivotal. So what is the most important thing I want you to learn from this class? The most important thing I want you to know the 1965 Hart-Celler Act. All right. Another thing I want you to know in Asian American Studies is this concept called the model minority myth. Now, there's a myth, and actually, I'm going to talk about it, how there was a beginning. You know how stereotypes are formed, right? And how there's like always a history. Well, the stereotype is all Asians are good at math, right? They're smart, they're good at math, they're rich, they're no problems, they're perfect, they're all doing great. Well, you know what? We call that the model minority myth. And actually, the interesting thing is it started by this person. His name is William Peterson. He wrote this article called Success Story, Japanese American Style. It basically talked about how, oh, Japanese, they're so successful after their intern. They all got jobs. Really? Really? That's not even technically true. A lot of them, unfortunately, perished in multiple ways, and their farms were taken away from them. They had mass depression and did not reproduce, and it was a terrible time. It wasn't a success story, but anyway, this article caught fire, and then every time you refer to Asians, you say, "Oh, successful." Not true. What is the real reason they created the model minority myth? Let's go. Why did they create the myth? Let's do a think, pair, and share. Let's pause this video and take 2 minutes and write down why did they create this myth? 2 minutes. Pause it. And the effect, 2 minutes, pause it. All right, you're back. Actually, they created this myth as an anti-black sword. They pretty much knew that if all the different minorities got together, that they can get together and actually fight for equality and win. When you fight together, you win. But guess what? If you divide and conquer and say, hey, one group, the Asians, are so much better and they're hardworking. And yeah, don't group up with the other minorities, even though a lot of Asians are actually on welfare, are not wealthy, are actually dropping out of college, but no one cares about them. So number one, it's a divide and conquer technique among people of color created outside of Asian Americans. Number two, it's created to hurt Pacific Islanders. Pacific Islanders, I saw this wonderful John Oliver clip. I hope you watch it. Pacific Islanders are not doing that great. They are actually overrepresented in the prison system, in proportion to their economy, their population, and they're living in a lot of poverty because they're being pushed off their native lands. Third reason, Southeast Asians. Did you know that a lot of Southeast Asians are not rich? In fact, many are on public assistance, dropping out of college in droves, and actually just all the maladies that everyone else has, they also have as well. Well, guess what? If you have the model minority myth, do you want to help Asians? No. And then you don't want to help Southeast Asians, even though they know and I think they do need help. So, has this ever been done again before? Yes, it has. Actually, it's done all over the world. Whenever you want to divide and conquer, break up the group, there's something called the Bacon Rebellion. Now, if you don't know the Bacon Rebellion after this lecture, I want you to look it up. Now, it was poor whites, mulattoes, African Americans, and Native Americans in America. And they're like, wait a minute, we're poor. Let's fight for our rights. And they all got together. They're like, hey, the rich people, they don't care about us. Let's fight for our rights as a group. And they're fighting. And guess what? What happened was, this is how you create race. They said, hey, poor white people, I know you're mistreated, but guess what? You're psychologically white. You have psychological superiority just because, yes, you are technically being mistreated just as much as poor African Americans, and you have more in common with other poor indigenous groups. But no, no, no. You have the psychological whiteness. And and one could argue this is what divided them from actually having a class sort of perspective, and it really broke them down. So again, model minority. Is it a conspiracy? Yes, it is, and it's working. Now, point of model minority. Well, it prompts anti-African American sentiment. Now, if you look at the COVID-19, you see that a lot on the TV. It was really interesting. I almost like I laugh because if I didn't, I'd cry. It said that African Americans were like killing Asian Americans when technically and actually factually, it was majority Anglo Americans, white Americans that were killing Asian Americans and actually doing anti-Asian hate crimes. But if you actually watch the TV, you'd actually think it's all African American. Not true, not true. Second, it pushes the idea of white supremacy. And thirdly, it's anti-Southeast Asian and Pacific Islander sword. Now, something I want you to know is the poverty level of Southeast Asians Pacific is huge. There's a large Southeast Asian high school and college dropout. A lot of Asians still do not speak English. They're illiterate. Most API, APA, or PETA, which is, they all mean the same thing. They live in the East and West Coast, which is higher living standards. And so when living costs, so you may think, oh, someone in Fresno is really rich because they pay $500 or $800 in rent. And you can buy a house with that in Alabama. But guess what? You're not living in a palatial area in Fresno if you're paying 500. It could be not as nice as you think. Okay. Again, that's also pushing this a non-reality of model minority myth. Also, it's the literate Asians, the documented. Remember, there's 2 million undocumented Asians. They're not going to fill out a census form. Also, there's large families. Now, if you look at the census, when they look data, they do it by how many people are in the same family household living. But if you're not wealthy and you live together, well, that's like how everyone's income. And again, what is the effect? Well, you got lack of scholarships, lowering college acceptance rate. Oh, you got an A, you're Asian. That's not even hard for you. You don't even get no accolades for that. Healthcare, you don't have it. A lot of Asians, actually, large groups of Asians don't have healthcare. There's no help. Actually, if other ethnic groups are bitter against you, okay, there's suicide. Unfortunately, Asian American women have one of the highest ideations of suicide. And of course, unfortunately, Native Americans have the highest completed suicide and rate. It's terrible. Okay. Also, there's a lot of stress from the family. Why can't you be a doctor? Why can't you be like X, Y, Z? Okay. And also, what about the gangs and crime that's actually in many Asian communities? You're not going to help them because you think they're the model minority. All right. Now, that on strike, the role of Asian American Studies by Campo and Min Zhou talked about the San Francisco strike that happened in 1968 and 1969. Why is this important? Well, actually, it brought us this class, MLK and Black Panthers, Richard Aiko. Actually, he was the help with guns for the Black Panthers. It was pushing for social and justice. Leaders of San Francisco State had the longest strike, resulted in the first ethnic studies department in the USA at San Francisco State, which resulted because of the strike. Of course, Berkeley, as well later, has a department as well. And a hint, you're sitting in this class, you are in ethnic studies class. People fought for this class. People fought and died for this class. This class is banned. This class is banned all over America. So please take advantage of this class. And again, this is a huge, during the same time as civil rights movement, it was part of a large group. Backdrop of the strike was feminist movement, civil rights movement, anti-war movement, student movement, oppressed nationalities all protested. And again, I think you're familiar with this, but of course, Black Power was one of the pushers of the civil rights movement. And again, this is one of the pushers of ethnic studies. Also, the anti-war movement it was part of. Now, Yuri Kochiyama, she believed that and this is her, Karen actually Umimoto writes, activists believe that education should be relevant and it should serve the needs of the people and the community, not the corporations. Now, do you agree with that? That's the point of ethnic studies right there. Represent us, be for us. And actually, we should teach us, the community, and it should be for the community instead of corporations. One Filipino activist said, when I came back to San Francisco State in 67 and the Black students were at the forefront in wanting programs, I think the Black students and the Black movement of the 60s made a major impact. And that's correct. Asian American studies would not be here without African American studies. Latino American, Mexican American studies would not be here without African American studies. Don't forget that it was Black movement first. Asian Americans, they face discrimination, especially in areas of education, employment, and housing. Think back of that model minority myth, right? Oh, Asians do great. Okay, actually not. Okay, again, if you're here, pause the video and write down all the racist events against APIs of late, or APAs, or APITAs, or SWANAs. They all mean the same thing, which is Asian American Pacific Islanders. All right, so there's, of course, the Black Panther movement, and students push for ethnic studies and women's studies courses, such as, what class are you taking? Asian classes were advocated for. The Chinese Student Association formed for the social cultural community development. The Filipino American Collegiate PACE was formed, and the Asian American Political Alliance. Third World Liberation, that's what they called it. APAs realized and identified with other oppressed people of color of the world, such as, pause and list it. Global, you see Cesar Chavez, you see the Red Book and Mao. There was a global revolution.